Okay, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Thank you for joining the Geoscience and Geoenergy webinar of today, 18th of November 2021. I hope all of you are doing well. We are experiencing another COVID wave in Europe, and that makes us also appreciate this online community that we have every week to get together, have a scientific or important, another non-technical, also important topics to discuss in the community of geoscientists and geoengineers. Please do subscribe to the channel. We have more than 2,800 subscribers. Do join the community. It would give positive energy to the entire community members as well. And you will also naturally receive notifications whenever we are live. Today, Sebastian couldn't make it. I have the pleasure to co-host you with my dear colleague, Andreas Busch from Heriot-Watt University, who is here with us. And Andreas has already also helped us before in co-chairing the sessions. Today, for the first time after more than 70 lectures we have hosted in our channel, we have the pleasure and honor of hosting two distinguished speakers at the same time. And for the very timely and very important subject of inclusivity and diversity in the community. I'm going to introduce our speakers, and then we will have their lecture like always, but they will share with each other the lecture. And then after that, like always, you will type your questions in the chat box, and Andreas would chair the discussion session. I'll start with introducing Louise. We are delighted to have our colleague, Louise Bailey, also with us here. She's a senior manager within OVO Customer Care. She established and leads an LGBTQ plus network with over 400 members across the UK. She implemented LGBTQ plus specific policies, developed and delivered training to more than 400 managers and updated systems to be inclusive for colleagues and customers. A mentor to LGBTQ plus colleagues and family members needing support, Louise has ensured the business is demonstrably LGBTQ plus inclusive, lighting up Wembley Arena, supporting with hashtag trans right is human or are human rights. Letters to government and recognizing all key dates in the LGBTQ plus calendar. Louise is a passionate ally and a committee member of Pride in Energy, working for LGBTQ plus inclusivity across the energy sector. It's a true pleasure and honor to have you, Louise, with us today. And I'm going to introduce our second distinguished speaker, Josh Atkinson. Atkinson is with us. Josh has chaired Pride in Energy since founding it in 2017. And now, in conjunction with the Networks Committee, delivers the annual survey, industry support, and an events program. Since joining the ENA in 2020, Josh has been supporting the association's work on skills and DEI. Josh is also the head of communications for ENA, responsible for all media and public affairs activity, including their forthcoming, which is actually not anymore forthcoming, it already happened, COP26 campaign. So again, it's a pleasure and honor to have both of you with the impact that you have offered in the community, with the important and extremely impactful topic of inclusivity and diversity. We are very much looking forward to your screen. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and if Josh would kindly please share his screen, then we would have both of you. To the audience, please note their lecture would last for about 20-25 minutes. And it's an example to all our distinguished speakers to know that you can deliver good quality talks in less than 30 minutes, that we always have to fight with them, please, make it brief, etc. So they're not going to just deliver an important topic, but also show an example of how can it be delivered and be shared with two people at the same time. So it's extremely an inclusive event today as well. We have Josh, we have Louise, it's amazing. So please do type in your questions in the chat box. Don't wait until the end of the lecture to post. Your question will motivate me and him and her to also ask questions. Do not feel anything that the question may not be appropriate or not. Do type whatever you are concerned about or you want them to reflect as well. They would be delighted to receiving all sorts of comments and questions that you might have, but they will also emphasize on this as well. So without any further ado, Josh and Louise, the stage is both yours. Actually, that's the first time you're offering to two people the stage, so that's great actually. So please, Josh, please do share your screen with us.
Great, thanks very much, Adi. And there's a few points I'll go through before going into the slides that we've got, just to kind of give a bit of background on the network itself. So as Hadi said, we were set up in 2017. I used to work for Energy UK, confusingly, which is the other kind of main energy utilities trade association in the UK. And whilst I was there, we set up Pride Energy, as well as a bunch of their other diversity initiatives. Since then, we've supported two Pride in London marches, where we took big groups throughout the whole day. A bunch of other events that we've run as well. So we did a pretty big lecture with Lord Brown about his time at BP when he was outed by the press. We did that in conjunction with Accenture. And then we've run other events with Ofgem and then with OVO and FTI Consulting and a whole host of other organisations across the sector. All of those kind of bits of work so far kind of fit within our overarching mandate of driving positive change for LGBTQ people across the industry. We've worked with a lot of companies, signposting them towards guidance. I think it's worth emphasising, as kind of Hadi explained in his introduction, like we're all doing this in addition to our day jobs. So whilst there are people who are diversity and inclusion experts within the committee, they're doing that for like their actual employers. We can't act as kind of a consultancy firm, but there is a wealth of information out there which we're kind of keen to signpost people towards rather. As well as other kind of protected characteristics, there's kind of a range of successes within companies within the sector which we've been really keen to champion and kind of share that best practice. Whether it's specific initiatives they have in place. So I know a lot of members of mine. Now I'm at ENA. I know that Electricity Northwest does an awful amount of outreach with local mosques because they've realised that despite having a very high Muslim population within their kind of geographic footprint, there weren't any people from those communities really applying for jobs. They did a lot of outreach to kind of find out what those barriers were and try and break them down. The thing in common across those initiatives, whether it's, like I say, other characteristics or LGBTQ ones, which we're trying to address through Pride Energy and a lot of the initiatives that Louise is involved in within OVO as well, is that there have been those well-supported employee-led networks which can kind of act from the ground up. But there's also leadership who buy into diversity inclusion, recognise the value of it, whether for their staff or simply for the bottom line. There's a huge amount of research out there which just goes to confirm that investing in this sort of stuff has a huge yield financially for a business. So aside from whether it's the right thing to do or not, it's just good business to be investing in. I think there was one bit of research actually, I don't know if you saw it, Louise, because you used to be at SSE, but SSE did some research a few years ago that for every £1 they invested in women's initiatives within the organisation, they got 3 back, which is a kind of a rate of return that you don't really get in the energy industry. So there's that kind of research and stuff, and a lot of kind of positive stuff happening. But as our own research, which I'll come on to in a moment, suggests there's still an awful lot to do. So whilst there are companies like OVO, which are incredibly progressive, there are other laggards, and there's other organisations and bodies within the sector which are clearly falling behind. We did our first annual survey in 2020/2021. We're just about to kick it off again. We're kind of finalising the questions at the minute, and they'll be launching it towards the end of the year. We're hoping that this second one will start as we'll be able to use that as the benchmarking exercise. We can start identifying those trends and working out whether there have been improvements or whether there's areas where, in particular, that the industry needs to catch up on. that's that next bit of research is reflective of the way in which we as a committee are ratcheting up a lot of what we're doing. So we're planning kind of effectively relaunching the network in the start of the new year and working with a number of other bodies who are hopefully going to be effectively sponsoring us to do a lot more work with a new website and, you know, really clear signposting a lot of the information that's out there, like I was mentioning earlier, and, you know, really kind of amplify the voice that we've been building over the past couple of years. In that spirit, I'll just show you the results that we got from the last survey that we ran, because, like I say, there were some particularly interesting trends there. And then Louise will come on to talk about kind of best practice and the great stuff that OVO is doing. So this is kind of a summary of all the results of that survey, and let me know if anyone can't see it. But effectively, we wanted to find out what the experiences of LGBTQ plus people in the industry were, so that we could then take a slightly more targeted approach to the work that we were doing. We got a kind of fairly predictable breakdown of you know, gender orientation, ethnicity, and age, and disability as well. I think field of work was probably a little bit skewed simply because we didn't get the kind of footprint of responses that I'd have hoped for in the first year. But like I say, it's the first time, and it's a case of building momentum year on year. Just to kind of go through the summary here. So the real headline figure, it's quite literally headline grabbing, as we've got quite a bit of coverage across the energy trade press. With that, over a third of respondents had witnessed or experienced discrimination based on their or someone else's gender identity or sexual orientation for the last 5 years. There were, however, some positives. So, you know, we have over 2/3 who felt comfortable enough to be out within the workplace, within the industry, admittedly to varying degrees, which I'll come on to in a sec. And a lot of people have felt that things have improved, particularly for LGB people. As I'll come on to later, there were kind of quite clear trends of the gender identity aspect of LGBTQ plus people being particularly behind, and that within the UK certainly being amplified by some of the hostile coverage we're seeing in the press at the minute. Like I said earlier, there are a lot of examples of good practice, particularly linked to newer entrants at companies like OVO, which are, you know, not necessarily incumbents, despite them now being bigger businesses. But there were huge inconsistencies. Blatant discrimination was still taking place. And I think the kind of real undercurrent that I've seen within our own research and other research on similar topics from other organisations, including my own, is that there is this kind of legacy culture, whether perceived or experienced, of, you know, it's an unpopular phrase, but the male, pale and stale people, and how that is effectively a barrier to LGBTQ people succeeding in the workplace, and it can even lead to them wanting to leave the energy industry. So just to go into some of these results in a bit more depth, as you can see, so well over half of people were out in the workplace, and then, you know, immediate team and close friends as well. The fact that 11% weren't out at all, obviously it's over 1 in 10, which is still quite a high number, but we saw that as somewhat of a positive, that the vast majority felt that they were able to be out, feeling a bit more comfortable. Particularly those within the sector. This is some of the kind of more anecdotal feedback that we got, and some specific quotes from respondents. But I think there's a lot of people who feel like they have been embraced in the workplace, you know, whether that's within their immediate team or by their overarching employer or organisation. And there's also quite a clear signs of progress, particularly for those who've been in the industry a long time. I think there's been some real seismic changes. And also, you know, these were some of the great bits of feedback we got on what good looks like to those organisations, and that's something that we've been kind of feeding back to a lot of the bodies that we talk to about this. There's an interesting trend here as well that respondents felt more positive about their own organisations and about the industry itself, which if we had more data, or if we'd gone into this in a bit more depth, it would have been quite interesting to kind of get a bit more information on, because it's one of those where perhaps the negative perception of the wider industry isn't necessarily fully reflective of reality. So as you can see here, most people were skewed towards thinking that their employers had an inclusive approach to LGBTQ plus people within the workplace. And then everyone else thought it was kind of in the middle, that, the wider industry wasn't necessarily great, even though their own employers were. Possibly because, as I mentioned a moment ago, the levels of LGBTQ plus discrimination have remained quite high. So we've got 1 in 10 who've experienced it within the last year, 25% in the last 5 years, making that a total of over a third, which was quite difficult for us to stomach. Again, a lot of this is kind of the same tropes that we've seen for decades, really, showing somewhat of a lack of progress within organisations. And a lot of the anecdotal feedback that we got through this section was focused on trans people. So it might not necessarily be things that they experienced themselves, but it was certainly things that they had witnessed across the organisation. And it's kind of reflective of this vicious circle. So drawing the conclusions that we drew were that, there is this male-dominated old guard industry, which kind of allows for and enables some of those kind of less than ideal behaviours, which then means that queer people don't necessarily feel safe to come out, they don't feel totally comfortable in the workplace, and in doing so, they don't necessarily feel empowered to, change it, let alone seek support, let alone change their organisation. And then that obviously means that they won't perform as well, and then might even want to leave, and then that becomes extrapolated into a bigger issue where we're struggling to change the reputation of the sector and attract new talent. It's worth noting on the attracting new talent point, I found out on the last event like this that I spoke at that there's a shortfall of 20,000 engineering grads in the UK every year. And these are people who expect their organisations to have inclusive, positive working environments. And if you don't have it, they'll just go somewhere else. They're not necessarily sold on working in the energy sector. A lot of people might be vocation driven. I know I certainly was to work in, clean energy stuff, but not everyone has that drive. They might be more happy working in management consulting or in the city or in, defence or whatever it might be, other sectors which have that positive working environment. Which is what we come on to and how we kind of break that vicious cycle. So there's kind of really foundational stuff, which I have to say, I think most companies do get, that they have solid and supportive HR policies, and that there's kind of best practice there. I think is quite easy to emulate because it's something which I think is very well established. But then it's kind of embedding that into the culture. So training managers to handle inappropriate behaviour, highlighting what's unacceptable behaviour, and providing diversity training across the organisation. As I was saying earlier, I think then we're getting into kind of top tier of what's most important. So once you've kind of done the basics, really. So having senior execs who talk about this stuff all the time. So not just LGBTQ issues, but D&I across the spectrum. I've got members, I've got CEOs within my membership who are, middle-aged white straight men, but they talk about D&I all the time, and their organisations are really, really embedding it. Because the minute you see that, whether because you're from a protected characteristic or not, it kind of really adds weight when your CEOs and directors and the whole management team are talking about this kind of stuff all the time, and it empowers individuals and managers to make those change and embed those policies a bit more. And then you can increase visibility of people. I think that there's a whole issue around you can't do what you can't see, which I have to say I think organisations like Powerful Women have done fantastic work in changing for gender diversity within the industry, where you've now got this whole organisation with dozens of very, very senior women who are out on the speaking circuit all the time. Equally, the Women in Utilities Network, and they're doing really, really fantastic stuff on that side of things. And then finally, once you've kind of ticked all those boxes and you've done all that stuff and embedded that kind of change, and you're able to promote the organization, if not the wider industry, as being LGBTQ plus friendly. And there's kind of a whole host of benefits that come with that, like I was describing earlier, whether it's purely business, staff retention, financial, whatever it might be. There's a lot of good stuff that can come out of that. Louise, do you want to talk about how some of that works in reality at OVO?
Absolutely. Just going to the next slide. So yes, I've kind of put here as the basics, and Josh just touched on that there. There's some things that you need to do in terms of making sure you get the basics right before you do anything else. And what I've said here is start internally, be aware of pink washing. So if, for example, you decide to change your logo, or you post something on LinkedIn, or you pop a pride flag up on your business, externally, then what people are going to be saying is, well, wait a minute, I see my company on LinkedIn have changed their logo, but actually what are they doing for me as part of the LGBTQ plus community? What can I actually see is happening? What you might also get is some of your customers as well asking, I see that you've changed your logo. Can you tell me exactly what it is you do to benefit the community? So be aware that you don't start thinking, I'm going to become LGBT inclusive. I'm going to start posting all this information out externally to our members, to our customers, for example, until you've got all your ducks in a row, for example, until you've got everything lined up properly internally. The best place to start is to look at your policies. So what policies have you got, and what policies are you missing? So do your policies include things like protecting your people? How do you handle any form of bullying or harassment? How do you define what bullying and harassment actually looks like? And how do you deal with that? How do you empower people to actually deal with that? We spoke a lot earlier, Josh spoke a lot around language and banter, for example, in the workplace. And again, it's making sure that we protect our people from that. Because a lot of the time it isn't actually banter, it's really offensive language that's been used. Also making sure that you've got trans inclusion policies. Again, a lot of the feedback that we're getting is that there's a lot of progression in terms of the LGB community, but in terms of trans and different genders, that there's a lot more that needs to be done. So making sure that you have a clear policy that is really inclusive of trans people. And that kind of falls on to the next stage as well. So looking at your full end-to-end employee journey, right from when they're recruited, right through to the systems that they use. So for example, if you have a trans person who is applying for a role in your business, so say for example, I am a trans woman and I apply for a role to you in how I identify as Louise Bailey. But then you ask me for my passport, and my passport or my birth certificate might have my previous name on that, for example. How do you deal with that if I don't necessarily want to come out to you at that stage, but you're asking me to fill in forms, for example? Let's just say that it's if we're doing the police checks, the name of it's right in my head, but if we're doing, the criminal checks, for example, where you need to disclose previous names, how do you deal with that if I don't really want to tell you what my previous name actually was and that I did have a previous identity? So making sure that people can use like non-gendered titles, whether that's for your customers or internally in your system. For example, do you have the MX title there? What do your on-site facilities look like? So if I am non-binary, do I need to choose whether to go into a male or female toilet? Do you have gender neutral shower rooms, for example? How is your facility set up? And also, what does your facility look like? Does it feel like a welcoming site for LGBTQ plus people? Look at your comms and your training, what words, what language has been used in there. Is there a lot of images that has a male and a female, a mum and a dad and a child? What is that? What is the content? What is the language that's been used in there, and making sure that is non-gendered? Also looking at the benefits that you offer people, again, making sure that any third parties that you work with are LGBT inclusive providers. And also looking at something that's really important for trans people is to make sure that, any transition in surgery would be covered as a benefit as part of any health or medical insurance. Your employee assistance program, again, making sure that if someone does contact them for help, that actually, if they were to phone them up and say, I'm pansexual, for example, that they don't need to spend time explaining what pansexuality is to someone, that they can actually spend the time, getting the counselling or getting the help and support that they need. And as I mentioned, making sure that your systems are inclusive for everyone. Not a lot of people like to use titles now, and certainly in terms of Mr., Miss, Mrs., these are very dated titles. So if your system doesn't need a title, just remove the need for it. If it does, make sure you've got gender neutral titles in there as well. Linking on to that, just be aware of the language that you're using. So, I mentioned it before, but making sure that your language is gender neutral. So even if you are looking at a maternity policy, to make sure that you're not talking about females or women. The same for menopause. Don't talk about women going through the menopause, for example. You would talk about people, because trans men, non-binary people will also go through the menopause. And likewise, you should make sure that you include andropause when you have a menopause policy as well, to make sure that, again, that it's inclusive of everyone. Again, Josh spoke about the importance of having senior leadership engagement. And this needs to be led from the top. You can have your grassroots, you can have your staff networks in place, which are so important, but you need to have that senior engagement right from the top. And it can be really difficult sometimes for people. Again, we mentioned the stereotypical white, heterosexual, middle-aged man. It can be really difficult for people to understand when you've only had a life of privilege. And reverse mentoring is very good for that. And it does what it says on the tin, where someone typically less junior, who in this situation, as part of the LGBTQ plus community, would spend time with your senior managers or senior leaders, educating them on lived experiences and the impact of that in the workplace. And that is so impactful. Again, having a staff network, so somewhere where your people can go for help and support or to raise issues, or even just for social events, especially during this time of COVID. We know that homelessness amongst the LGBTQ plus community has increased. Online bullying has definitely increased. You only need to look at Twitter every day to see the abuse that trans people get. So having a network that's there as a support for people is really, really important. But also, if you empower your staff network to make all of these changes that we're talking about, then it gives them that feeling of pride as well. Senior out role models. So, Josh says you can't be what you can't see. If I look up, who do I actually see up there? You need to make sure that your business has out role models, to say that, you can succeed, you can progress if you're part of this community. This will not hold you back. And here is me. And again, here's my lived experiences. And if you don't have that, then look within the industry of some role models that you can actually profile and celebrate those people as well. The LGBTQ plus calendar is huge. There's so much celebration. But, if you were to pick a few of the key events, things like LGBT History Month, Pride Month, this week is Trans Awareness Week, and on Saturday we have Trans Day of Remembrance. If you were to pick a few key dates like that and make sure that you celebrate them, and when I talk about celebrating, it's not just all about the Pride parties, celebrate them through education. So teach your people who maybe don't know about, Trans Day of Remembrance, for example, or don't understand the history of LGBT, use that as an opportunity through your communication to educate people on why this is so important, and why, some people might think, well, there's no homophobia in this company, but to share, actually, you just don't see it. And here's some of the things that you need to be aware of. And sometimes it's not until you point out to people some of the basic things, like, you'll see that I've got myself and Josh earlier on, and you can see as we have our pronouns next to our name. And that's really, really important in terms of visibility, and to let people see that you are an ally and that you are supportive as well. So celebrate, have that internal visibility where people can see that this is an inclusive workplace. Understand the role of an ally. So I speak about this a lot, and even for your staff networks, you don't need to be LGBT to want to actually make a difference. I'm an ally. And I do this out of passion because I can see the challenges that people face every day. So really understand the role of an ally. An ally isn't saying, yes, I accept people who are gay. That's not an ally, probably quite the contrary, actually. An ally, and I talk about an ally as being an active ally, is someone who actually does something to make a difference, even if it's just joining the staff network, even if it's just reading about the history of Pride and the Pride flag and why that's so important. It's about doing something to educate yourself, to listen to people, to not expect to get it right all the time, and to be comfortable being uncomfortable while you go through that process of learning. And there's lots of great ally programs out there to make sure that you can get everyone involved, and that all of this, when we talk about D&I, that all of this isn't left to the underrepresented groups. We need allies to be the voice and to drive this forward. Think about in your day-to-day, how visible are you? I mentioned the pronouns, which are so important. And even if it's just something like a rainbow lanyard, that can give a simple signal to someone that you are an ally, that you are supportive, that you have an LGBT inclusive workplace. So something simple, internal, is very, very, very effective. Use third parties for advice, training, or expertise. You're not expected to know everything, but there are really good resources. And obviously you've started this today by inviting Pride and Energy over to have this conversation. There's lots of third parties out there who can share that lived experience. You know, this week, for example, we've been doing lots with Trans in the City, and that's trans people who are sharing their experiences of their life, and particularly in the workplace. What were their challenges and how did they overcome them? So look externally and use that expertise. And make commitments. Make bold commitments around what you're going to do. You know, if you're starting off in your journey, wherever you are, you know, nobody's there yet. We long for the day where Pride and Energy doesn't need to exist, and where our staff networks don't need to be there because our businesses are all fully inclusive. We know that we're not there yet. So everyone, wherever you are in your journey, has still got a way to go. So make sure that you set out those commitments in terms of what you're going to achieve. And it's not, as I say, all just about celebrating. You know, set yourself that. Well, that's whether you deliver one change per quarter for 2022, then there'll be 4 significant, tangible things that you've actually changed to make your business more inclusive. Measure how inclusive you are. Use all your D&I information, see where you are just now, and set targets, and then set about in terms of how you're actually going to deliver on those targets to make sure that you have that diverse workforce who can then create an inclusive place to be. So that is me, Josh. That was very quick, and I think we went over our 25 minutes, so apologies for that. So I will just hand back and we can open up for some questions.
Thank you very much for this extremely interesting presentation, and you were quite on time, actually, and I have taken a lot of notes. I would like to give, as always, the floor to the audience first, but it's great to have you. But if I may squeeze one question before I give the floor to Andreas, is that how the two of you came up with this Pride in Energy? What was it that you observed, that you said very nicely, Josh, that you have your own business, 100% job somewhere, and then you feel there is something, and people like you make communities, make changes today. And what was it in you two that you observed that we should change, and let's make this huge community?
We had a little bit of it was a little bit baptism of fire type situation. So like I said earlier, I was at Energy UK, which is a different trade association at the time, and I remember just through my wider social circle, I've got other friends who I've been to similar LGBTQ network events, whether it was for law or property in those two cases, where they both have very well developed laws, particularly well funded. They've got like employees of their network, but they do really, really big things within their respective sectors. And I kind of like had a bit of reflection one day and realized that, you know, there wasn't anything for the energy industry. I thought that some companies had things, but there wasn't that kind of cross-industry thing. And then I had a fantastic line manager at the time. She's very supportive. She's a big ally. And Barbara Vest, who actually now has an OBE for services to the industry, turned to me and just said, "Well, why don't you do one then?" And I was like, "Okay." So then kind of had to give it some thought, put together a paper for the board, who kind of resoundingly approved it. and were really, really supportive. And then I kind of speculatively applied for us to have a place at Pride in London that summer, which was only kind of 3 months later, which I then got, which I was not expecting. And then all of a sudden had kind of like 3 months to recruit people, bring people, like get everything. Was just a bit kind of rushed and frantic for that period. But I think that, like I say, it was a slightly chaotic beginning, but since then it's just been a case of building momentum and bringing the committee, which, you know, Louise is such a fantastic member of. There's kind of 7 of us in total, who kind of work across the industry and all have different kind of roles within Pride Energy. So there's kind of a lot of other activity that we're doing as well.
Louise, do you want to add?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, so I just joined Pride and Energy probably just over a year, 18 months ago. But my motivation for setting up the staff network, which was set up about 4 years ago, was when my son came out as gay and spoke a lot around the language and the impacts that language had on him through his school years, which I was unaware of at the point. And when he was speaking, I thought, I hear this language used in my workplace every single day. So my employer at that point was a bit resistant to set up a single network group, but I just set it up anyway. I knew there was a need. I could hear it, I could see it, I could feel it. When you actually start to look for things, that's when you notice them, and that's where you identify the gap. And actually, I set up the network full of allies first of all, and then we brought on people, you know, once the word got out there, and we had some people who then felt comfortable about joining the network as LGBTQ+, and the network just grew and grew from there.
Fantastic. You both provided great service to the community. We on behalf of the community, we thank you. Andreas, now you are the chair, please. So there are many questions posted, so I stay silent as much as I can.
Yeah, also for me, thank you for this fantastic talk. I mean, it was really brilliant, and it's really great that this community exists and that you're promoting this. Absolutely. So there's a couple of questions and comments, and we'll probably start with Martje Boom, asking what training courses do you recommend to participate on diversity and inclusion?
Yeah, I'll maybe start. So as a starting point, then I would look at some training on unconscious bias. So before you can kind of really understand where you are, you need to understand what your own biases are. And you also need to be consciously aware of how you can practice to overcome them, because we all have biases, we all have different backgrounds, and we all, prefer having a conversation with someone who likes me, who agrees with me, who thinks my ideas are great. And we need to overcome that to understand that actually we need this diversity of thought, because if we don't have that diversity of thought, we can never move forward. So for me, it's definitely about understanding unconscious bias. There's lots of different, courses that are recommended, full day courses. So you could probably just Google lots of them. But for me, that's definitely the place to start.
Perfect, thank you. There's unless Josh, you have anything to add?
It's not my total area of expertise. It's more Louise would be far more insightful about specific courses. But I think the areas where I've learned the most is going to talk. So not events a bit like this, where there's been someone coming to talk about whether it's their own experience or what their specific organisation's doing. If you're looking at kind of implementing things, and it is that kind of cross-industry learning that I think is really beneficial. And one of the things that we did when I was at Energy UK, along with setting up Pride Energy, was setting up a diversity inclusion forum, which was effectively just a committee of our members where they all came and shared what they were doing, because what might work for OVO might not work for some another organisation. So my company is less than 50 people, so putting in place a lot of this stuff is kind of not irrelevant, but it's not, we wouldn't have an LGBTQ network for ENA because there's 45 of us, so there's it wouldn't necessarily make the most sense, but it was a really great forum for everyone to learn what worked, because it's probably not appropriate thing to say to a group of academics, but I'm a big believer that there's no new ideas, and when it comes to sort of stuff, very often someone else has invented the wheel and you can kind of see what they're doing and emulate it.
Yeah. Maybe I can ask a quick related question that I had. In big organizations and companies, do you rather need to convince people higher up in management to offer such courses, or do you need to convince, say the working force a little bit lower in the hierarchy to actually participate in such courses?
Yeah.
So where's more pull?
But it's absolutely both. So first of all, in terms of the investment, then it's making that that conversation, having that conversation, getting that agreement from senior management. And sometimes, one of the things that I did, when I set up the network in terms of proving, was I did my own staff survey, and I said, our results were worse than 30% of our people had witnessed or had experienced homophobia, biphobia, or transphobia. And sometimes it's saying, this is what our people are telling us, and we have an issue. Our business has been about for a long time, as Josh says, the stereotypical in terms of people. And sometimes people don't know what they don't know, and people just think that they are having banter and they don't know any different. So that education piece is key in terms of letting people know the impact of saying a word and what that could do to people. So there is a piece in terms of, if you need the budget and you need the buy-in, then you of course need to persuade your senior management. And then there is about making sure that people can understand that there is a need for them to attend the course, and what they're actually going to get out of it. And sometimes what we've done is we've started off small, we've done some small courses, and then based on feedback is to let other people know about this training, and then they'll come and say, oh, actually we heard about this course, can you run that again, can you put that on again? Because people then identify the needs for it when we start talking about it.
Yeah.
I have to say, when it comes to kind of senior buy-in, having kind of done this sort of stuff at 2 different associations with dozens of businesses now, it's not necessarily the C-suite and the top bods that you have to convince. They're often the ones where they recognise that there are issues here. A lot of people, particularly within UK utilities, are still wrestling with gender balance, let alone race, LGBTQ, disability, like all the other protected characteristics. So when you have someone like our organisation and other training bodies, or Stonewall in a lot of cases, when they can turn around and say, here's a pre-packaged solution to the issue, then normally CEOs kind of go, brilliant, come in and just go and do it, please. The only time I think I've ever seen any people at that level act as a barrier, and it wasn't necessarily them being hostile to it, is that they didn't really understand why there was the need. They thought their organisations were fine, and then they had to kind of have the mirror shown to them to kind of show that wasn't necessarily the case.
Thanks for this. Martia has actually a second question that is related, so it's probably good following up on this and follow up on that. Do you think we should offer diversity course as part of curriculum besides ethics to students? So as basically part of their study at university. I mean, obviously you're in industry, but we start here at university 1 level lower, right? In terms of awareness, do you think it should be part of the curriculum?
Absolutely, it should be part of the school curriculum. We need to get this education in early. In fact, it is part of the Scottish school curriculum. Scotland became the first country in the world to mandate the LGBT as part of the school curriculum. So the earlier that we can get this out to people, the better. So 100%.
Yeah, that was clear. There is comments from David McNamara, not really having question, but it's probably worth repeating what he was typing. So he seemed to be, I have the impression, he seemed to be quite happy with what you were presenting, but not sure about that. No, he's absolutely delighted about what you said. So it's probably good to highlight because it's absolutely true. There's a second one that you can see there. So this is just for you guys.
Thanks.
All right. Sebastian seems to be online now. Survived the dentist, it seems. And he's saying, again, also thanks for the fantastic talk. Do you have recommendations of how to best set up the reverse mentoring, which I think is a great approach? And Sebastian had the pleasure of experiencing this in an informal basis.
No, That's great. And I think probably the best way to set it up is to do it as a pilot, again, to kind of, prove the worth and get the message out there to everyone in terms of the benefits. So if you have network groups or if you have underrepresented groups, it is reaching out to them to put that, put the opportunity to the mentors. To be fair, the mentor doesn't get too much in terms of what they benefit from. It's probably a longer term benefit for the mentor. You might invest in some mentor training for them if they're new to mentoring, so they would benefit from that. They would also benefit if they see their mentee taking away some of their feedback and implementing change. But what the mentee will get from that is a whole new perspective of life that they probably have no direct links with, they have no lived experiences with, and they can't really understand, to properly understand and take some of the issues and again, go and make differences by that. And again, it's a really good way of becoming an active ally. So it's about reaching out to people. It's about sharing the benefits of it. As I say, set it up small initially, get some of your mentors from underprivileged groups. That can be it doesn't need to be LGBT, any underrepresented group at all. And then get who are the people that you need to influence. So, for example, when we first did it, we started with our C-suite, which has been very beneficial because in terms of keeping that conversation going, they will relate back and they have a long-term mentor relationship. But what we are doing now is tackling our middle management and the people that can actually make a difference, who have an influence on large number of teams. And again, focusing on in specific areas, using our diversity data to say what are the areas of our business that don't have that diversity in their makeup yet, that we can use this opportunity to help and support them to understand a little bit more about diversity and inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. We have a question of Peter Zhu, probably. What do you think is the most important thing that people in academic research areas should be learning to work with their LGBTQ plus colleagues well and nicely?
I don't know if it's necessarily a learning thing, but I think it's just a case of it's very basic respect. So I think a lot of this kind of stuff just comes down to like good manners, really. Using the correct pronouns and respecting people's privacy or whatever it might be. I think that's just kind of a very like basic level, if that's kind of how you want to kind of look at it in terms of getting on with people.
Yeah. And recognizing the needs for education. So, being open, and as I speak about being comfortable with being uncomfortable, being open about what you don't understand, what you can't relate with, but also educating yourself, taking yourself on a journey to learn more. And the big thing for me is always the point around language. So be aware of some of the language that you use and every day, something that we use probably 10 times every day is the word guys. Say hi guys, right guys, and the impact of using that word to someone who is a trans woman or someone who has tried their whole life not to identify as a male. So something very simple can have such a huge impact on people. And that's an extreme example, understand that, but it is something that we are trying to work on. But there's other language that you should be aware of the impact that can have on people. And again, making sure that you are using that gender neutral language as well.
I think I also sometimes have the impression that people are a little bit reluctant interacting with the LGBTQ plus community because people are just afraid of saying something wrong, right? And then rather not saying anything, working alongside while knowing, but then don't really know how to whatever say the right thing. I mean, of course, it's all about mistakes, right? These are the mistakes we do.
That's it. And again, just about being open, so even the word, Josh spoke about being queer earlier on. And sometimes when you say that, people will say, oh my goodness, we can't use that word. And, it's just about understanding. And you're right in terms of people can be nervous in terms of having the conversation. And that's why it's important when you have those learning environments to state that it's a safe space, ask the questions, don't worry about, using the wrong language. But also if you were to go into an LGBTQ plus space and just be open and say, apologize if I use, something, if I misgender you, if I use the wrong pronoun, I apologize and then move on from it. But, just take it as a learning opportunity. Definitely don't be scared be willing. Everybody will support you in terms of your own learning, and they'll want to support you as much as you want to support them.
Yeah.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is I think it's a general rule that I have for just in the other kind of areas I'm an ally, is I think you can get stuff wrong once, and if someone corrects you, you just have to acknowledge that, take that on, whether it's their gender or their race or whatever it is. You just go, all right, cool, thanks for that. I'll make sure I'm right next time.
Totally. Tara Force is recommending probably a book called The Inclusion Dividend by Mark Kaplan and Mason Donovan, which has tips how companies can set up effective D&I programs. I don't know if you can comment this one, if you know that probably book.
Not me.
No, sorry.
Well, thanks, Dara. Thank you.
Yeah,
She was
but certainly worth looking into, I would think. I have one more question. Obviously, it's we are always blaming the old white male, right? I'm one of them, of course. So I'm happy to be blamed, of course. But is that actually? I mean, Josh, you were showing that probably the acceptance across all industry for LGBTQ plus is somewhat higher than specifically for the energy industry. Is this because there's more old white male making the decisions, or is that because there's more engineers, or because it's more conservative in general?
I think it's kind of a combination of factors there, and I think it's also one of those things where a lot of the industry hasn't necessarily had to compete for staff and like other kind of things like that in the way that other sectors have. The kind of seismic transformation that we're seeing with the shift to net zero is the first time since privatization in the UK that there's been kind of a huge shift. And I think there is a very well-established culture of job for life. So we have, I know a lot of companies have flagged to me that they've basically got like big retirement bubbles coming, where they've got an aging workforce and they've got loads of people who are going to be retiring in like a very short space of time. And the majority of those people that are retiring are older white men. So there's that kind of, there is a big kind of legacy, almost backlog of staff who've been in the industry for a very long time. And that is kind of rapidly changing. And I think if you're comparing it to other industries, which is kind of in part of the question, I think there was someone posed that question in the chat as well. I think we're definitely behind. If you look at a lot of the metrics that are out there, so Stonewall run their Workplace Equality Index, which is a really comprehensive bit of research they do every year. I can't remember this year or the most recent one, but the one before didn't have a single energy company on it. And we're, a very significant percentage of the economy, hundreds of thousands of staff across the UK, and not a single company, many of whom are, blue chip FTSE 100s who aren't there.
Yeah. No, very good. Thanks. Apologies to Yuan. I think I missed your comment, which was pretty much the first one. It just moved down on my screen. So that question is probably also very worth being answered. So, who were the communities of your statistical survey? Were there special characteristics like EU residents or something like that? So it's probably a bit related.
So we just promoted across all of our channels. So we have a distribution list of our members, which has a few hundred people on it. We've got our social media channels, which pushed it out across. And then a lot of other organizations shared it within their own bodies. So I know my membership were promoting it, Energy UK's membership were promoting it. So it went out kind of as far and wide as we could get it, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And probably one final question is again from Martje Boon. So are there differences between industry and academia when it comes to diversity factors? Or is that something you haven't really looked at?
Yeah, I wouldn't have the answer to that, I'm afraid. There's not something our research has covered.
Yeah. Difficult to tell. I would hope there's some differences, that academia is a little bit more open, but who knows, right? It's also often run by probably old white male. Yeah. No, this is. I hope all the questions that we got and all the comments. Thanks again also to David for making that comment. It's always good to really see it, what people think about the talk. That's great. Thanks to you, Louise and Josh, and then probably Hadi for some final words. Imagine.
Thanks a lot. Yes, both of you. We could have run this for much longer time, but we have to stop. It's the time. It's before you know, it's 1 hour. You have been answering questions and discussions, by the way, and trust me, it has triggered a lot of thoughts in our minds. And now I'm thinking at how tomorrow I could just behave differently and be more inclusive in my behavior, in the choices of words. Even very small changes sometimes may cause big impacts. So thanks a lot. That was a lesson I got in this, and I hope that many of our audience have also taken notes of this. So I'd like to also take the chance to introduce our next week speaker. Next week, we are going to host Professor Ahmed El-Sheikh from Heriot-Watt University. Ahmed will give a talk about geostatistics within geoscience and engineering domain. So until next week, the same time, 4 p.m. Central European, 3 p.m. British time, 7 a.m. California. Stay happy, healthy, and tuned into this channel for another geoscience and geoenergy webinar. Thanks a lot, Josh and Louise. It was a pleasure to host you too. Thank you. Thanks a lot. I just muted you all, but now
thanks very much.
All the best.
Please do register for our distribution list and follow us on Twitter. We're at Pride and Energy. And
yes.
If you just Google Pride and Energy, it comes up with our registration page as well.
Thanks.
Just some self-promotion there.
Of course, absolutely. That's all about it. But I'm sure people will Google you both and we will find you. Okay.
Great.
Thanks a lot. Have a nice week, everyone. Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
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 Bye.